Well, a very warm welcome to this edition of Chewing the Fat. My name's David Roth, and my guest today is Tim Greenhalgh, the Chief Creative Officer and the Chairman of FITCH. Tim, very warm welcome.
Hi, David. How are you?
Very good indeed. One of the things I was thinking about, Tim, there's certain things you miss in this sort of what I suppose some people might call splendid isolation world at the moment, and that is, sitting with people and just contemplating what's going on in the future. And I've got to say, one of the people that I do miss that physical contact with and sitting over the desk is with you, Tim. So this isn't as good as it could be, but it's do you know,
we'll
Tim,
make it work. We'll make it
work. Obviously you're the chairman and creative director of FITCH, but FITCH itself, of course, the name comes from Rodney Fitch, who you had the pleasure of working with for many years, and I had the pleasure of also working with not as long as you, but working in and around the orbit of Rodney. He was a cantankerous old devil, wasn't he?
He was a remarkable person in that he didn't suffer fools gladly, but actually he was one of the most nurturing and caring people I think I've ever worked with. He cared passionately about design. He cared passionately about creativity. In fact, he would probably cuddle the designers more than the client service people or the strategy people. He liked designers. He liked creative people. But you produced a bad piece of work, you'd certainly know about it.
Oh, you certainly did.
His famous thing that I witnessed many times was often getting back on a plane with him from some trip we'd made abroad and standing in a queue in Heathrow and at the passport control and going, "This is a national disgrace." He would write to his local MP to formally complain about it because he hated queues, whether it's in a store or whether it's at passport control.
I mean, we sort of forget. I mean, probably you don't, but I think one does forget how instrumental Rodney was in the whole sort of retail design and the pretty much the way in which stores even look today.
Yeah, I think it would be a mistake to think that in the late 70s and the 80s, the real retail design boom, that it was just a simple case of style over substance. Of course, there were many beautiful stores created. It was a heyday in terms of the interior design of stores. But I think fundamentally the thing that Rodney cared about was giving people a great shopping experience and understanding the needs of people as opposed to just solving all the problems with a pretty chandelier. He always encouraged us at Fitch to go out onto the streets and to watch how people shop, to watch how they spend time and how they move through spaces. Often spending time with Rodney, you'd walk around somewhere and the things he would see that would just go over your head. Amazing.
It was amazing. It was a masterclass. In fact, to go around a store, if you could create your dream sort of store walk with a fantastic operator and Rodney, and tag along on those discussions, that would have been amazing.
Yeah, and I think something you and I have talked about. I think that if he was around now, one, I think he'd be tearing his hair out about the frustration of people not being out doing what they enjoy doing, and he'd feel for them. But also, I think he'd be putting his mind to work very, very in a focused way to think about how we don't forget that shopping is a joyful experience. So whilst there are a lot of practical things we've got to solve, let's make sure we keep looking for the way in which we can make it joyful as well. Yes, we may need to be 2 meters apart. Yes, there may be more perspex than we can physically make to keep us all safe and all that type of stuff. But how do you keep it joyful? And I think he'd be working very hard now to be thinking of the new new dynamics of retail that will start to emerge over the next few months and years.
Well, there are many things that I see. Hardly a week goes by I don't see something interesting in retail, and 9 times out of 10, I say to myself, I would have loved to have been able to show Rodney this or discuss this with Rodney because he would have had a really interesting take on it. Now you've just created a store in Singapore for Singtel. That's Singapore's mobile telecommunications operator. It's a retail store, but it has no physical staff in it. Do you think that's something that Rodney would have loved or hated? And perhaps you can tell us a little bit, Tim, about I suppose the thought behind that store, and describe a little bit of how it is, how it operates, and then we can do a little bit of a deep dive into, is this significant in the annals of retail store design?
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, I think it's certainly something that's relatively new.
What was the thinking? What was the thinking behind it? How did you get there as a designer, as a creator? How did you actually get to the solution?
It came. The solution. All solutions come through the challenge that was created by the client, which was, we'd like to get closer to our customers. We just completed the flagship store for Singtel in Singapore. But they asked us if we would explore and look at a way in which they could have maybe smaller formats and formats that are automated, so we can take the brand to where people are. Nice idea. And so, of course, we looked at things like pickup lockers, ways in which you can do automatic payment, automatic bill reviews, all that type of stuff. But as we started to think it through, going back to my point before about joy, I want to see new products. I want to play with new products. And so the whole space then became a place where new brands and new products that have just emerged into the marketplace, because this is a very dynamic technology marketplace,
sure,
you could go and try those products. But also while I'm there are vending machines where I can pick up an accessory that I need. But also, as I said, there are lockers where I can pick up products that I've ordered. The key to it, however, was if you think about what we talk about at Fitch in terms of PHD, physical, human, and digital, was that whilst this was unmanned and this was fully automated, it shouldn't be unhuman. I don't even know if unhuman is a word, but I'll use it anyway.
Well, we'll let you have that.
Thanks a lot. I might even try and use it in Scrabble, see if I get away with it, because I'm playing a lot of that at the moment. The whole point is you go into the store, there's a screen and somebody says hello to you, and it's literally a member of staff who's there, but they're doing it through Zoom or whatever platform we needed to use. They say, hi, how are you? How's things? If you need any help, come back and chat to me, just like a normal member of staff would do. It's cost effective from Singtel's point of view. But then equally, I can go over to a wall where there's a series of voice over IP stations where I can talk to somebody about my bill. I can talk to somebody about an order that I made a few days ago online. And so it's a very nice blend of the physical and the online coming together. And so far, it's been very successful. And let's be clear, as you hinted, really, is that it was actually remarkably created before all this happened, but seems to have become could be a sweet spot that we've landed on in terms of a potential future format for retail going forward, as we start to think about large spaces, small spaces, and all the spaces in between.
And what was the creative leap that you made from, I suppose, the notion of Singtel wanting to get closer to their customers to something that you would have thought was the antithesis of that, which was a store that didn't have people in it?
So the closeness was more about overcoming and getting around the issues of existing and typical real estate and where stores typically are versus where people want to be, whether it's in a piazza or a town square or gathering places. This was also, I suppose, building off the growth and the emergence of food trucks or pop-up. This is a permanent pop-up in a way. It changes regularly because of the fact of its nature. And so that was an interesting idea, that this could literally be shipped in It can be moved around. We're even now looking at a flagship unmanned store. Think about that. I mean, great. You take the flagship principles. We're even looking at two-story unmanned stores. But the point is, it's not lacking in conversation. It's not lacking in a sense of community and a sense of sociability, because I can still talk to people. I can talk to people as much as I need to, because there are screens everywhere that I can say hi to people. On the one hand, I suppose it sounds potentially dystopian in terms of it all being a little bit too robotic, but we were very clear to try and make sure that there was a very warm human aspect to the space as well.
What were some of the both design and technology sort of challenges? From getting to, I'm sure you did some wonderful renders and illustrations,
Yeah,
which looked phenomenal. To the practicalities of of a store that has to work to
I think that,
a rhythm and to have an operating procedure.
yeah, I think one of the most obvious ones would be, because there's nobody there. Of course, after hours, people go in, they clean it up, they re-merchandise, they fill up the lockers, etc. But during the day when it's operational, and there are a number of high-value products out for display, firmly fixed down, of course, as you'd expect. So one of the first was, I suppose, just security. The high level of security cameras in there, just so that the central control room can just keep an eye in the way that a normal member of staff would if they were actually standing in the store. So there was that. There was, in fact, now one of the things we're starting to look at is how we can be, because of the recent events, how we can even now be looking at ways in which people can just be checked or monitored in terms of their temperature or their potential health. Not because we're trying to be discriminatory about who comes in or doesn't, it's open to all, but more the fact that when I'm in the space, I can feel comfortable that the people I'm surrounded by, 2 meters apart, of course, are equally healthy, and therefore I'm not at any risk. So there was those elements, and then of course there was the issue of just making sure that there was a good data feed, all those kind of things, the practical things to make sure that the technology in the space worked efficiently.
Now, I don't know. Do you see these types of stores in current format? I'm sure they'll develop over the next few months as you go to your next iterations of them as being sort of part of the jigsaw of formats that
Mm.
stores around the world will need to have in their store portfolio.
I think you've touched on a very interesting point there. Um, and I think it almost ties back to some of the things we were talking about in terms of Rodney, because Rodney was at kind of the beginnings of when stores went from just being a store on the high street to then suddenly being a big out of town store or a local store. I think one of the challenges people like you and I and others will need to be thinking about on behalf of our clients and with our clients is, what is a format in the future? Because some of my learnt behavior, some of my learnt knowledge about what constitutes a retail format hasn't necessarily gone out the window, but it is certainly being challenged, it's being questioned now. And so the thing we've just talked about, the Singtel thing, is an equally valid format as is a local store or a small, medium, or large. The other thing to add to that, I suppose, which was already in train way before this, was how I think about my format strategy, my portfolio of places where people can shop with me also includes digital. I mean,
Of course.
we were very interested in this idea that I have my physical formats on one side. I have my digital formats, which is typically my e-commerce and mobile commerce formats. I am getting very excited about the idea of something that sits in between, which is my virtual/streaming showroom. A wonderful CGI world that I can create very quickly, almost in prototypical form, and put out there for people to then go and spend time with me and my brand and my products, and have demonstrators in there talking to me about the features and benefits, almost like a blending of QVC meets YouTube meets the most wonderful flagship on one of the major high streets in the world. So I
That's
think,
that's either going to be wonderful just some people's vision of what hell is going to be all about.
Well, we'll see, because we're already seeing elements of it, as you know yourself. We're already seeing elements of it emerging in China, where they're using live streaming linked to WeChat, etc., which is more than simply just an e-commerce site, add to basket, hit pay. It's a place where you can get completely immersed in things that you are passionate about. So,
Yeah,
somebody,
and we've also seen brands, retailers like Showfields. I mean, Showfields, as you
mm,
know, is located in the heart of Soho. It's all about giving a showcase to a lot of the direct-to-consumer brands.
yeah,
Of course, their showroom is not operating at the moment, and they've moved pretty much to, live streaming by all the various different, independent, small direct-to-consumer businesses on a very regular basis, and I understand that's going exceptionally well. So I do see that sort of way in which live streaming, product demonstrations, be it professional, be it via amateurs or whatever, all being linked into the way in which the retailer looks at, or the manufacturer and the retailer looks at what their sort of formats are. And I sort of feel, and I felt for a while, that the retail industry has been besotted with size as the way of defining what a format is. We had hypermarkets and large stores
yeah,
and convenience stores and mid-sized stores, and that was the way that us as retailers, and I've done my time as a retailer, so I'm complicit in the problem. But that the size, in a sense, defined ranges, and it defined how the store was operated and how many staff it has, and all those sorts of things. And in a funny way now, size actually is not the
no,
defined
exactly.
criteria, and I think we're all going to have to be much smarter about how that all works.
I think we're potentially moving to a almost size agnostic world.
Yes.
That as long as the experience is great and the experience is matching what the consumer is looking for at that particular moment, because we live in a potentially infinite world that can be both digital and physical. There's something very, very interesting there. And I also think that size was often dictated, as you remember, by, you know, in a large store, I'm going to need 45 cash points, which is going to take up
Yes.
a third of the space. So therefore, I'm going to need a very big space.
Yes. And of
Whereas
course,
now,
the other irony was, I've got this very space, this massive space.
yeah,
Um, you know, Instruction to buyers, find ranges to fill it,
right,
not
right,
what's the ultimate range. It was the other way around, which is you've got this amount of linear square foot, go away and make sure you fill it.
that's right, that's right. And I think that future format strategies could be around. I need a transaction format. Go figure. Is it digital? Is it physical? Don't know. So maybe a combination of both. I need a demonstration format, and I need a sociability format, because one of the things we're finding from some of the research we've been picking up over the last few weeks in terms of people's attitude to what they miss about shopping, what they miss in a restricted time, is the fact that a lot of people talk about how they use shopping and going to stores. It is part of the fabric of society. We can't deny that. Um,
Or as Rodney would have said, it is
it's
the meaning of life.
the purpose of life, absolutely. Rather controversially, but then
Yes.
that was Rodney. Um, but yeah, they talk about going to stores primarily to meet friends. Now, we've not been able to do that. We will increasingly and hopefully slowly get back to doing that. But again, what is my format for sociability? What is my format for transaction? What is my format for celebrating and showcasing an amazing range? But it may not need to be all the range. Going back to your point, we've got this big store, we need to fill it. Might be that the fulfillment of the full spectrum of my range can be done online very well, but that actually I get to give people a snippet or a tapas version of all the things that I do and all the things that I care about as a brand, and a bit like Showfields. I mean, Showfields is a very interesting dynamic, and it's good. And it's good to hear that they're doing well during these times, because just to assume that the only way that they could survive and exist and be palatable and excellent would be in a physical format has simply proven not to be true, I think.
Do you think there's a requirement now for much more fluidity in terms of what the format's there for, how it operates, how it can sort of change its form and its function very quickly depending on what the circumstances around the sort of the several sort of W shapes I think we're going to go through in the next sort of couple of years?
I mean, I think my first answer to that would be yes. I think I say that because I think I think customers have become far more fluid in the way that they shop. But there's a difference between me saying, of course, yes, versus the practicality of some retailers and some brands and their existing formats and their existing legacy estate. So whilst we may all dream of a more or imagine a more fluid world, getting from where you are today to where you might be in the future is a more nuanced discussion, I think. But in essence, yes, I think that, and even again in these last few weeks, sorry to keep harping on about it, so many more people have become so much more comfortable now with shopping online.
Yeah.
Whereas maybe prior to this, they had only used it for a certain few things. They've now started to explore it. But equally, that might have thrown up some frustrations with it. It is just simply a scrolling through a list of products and adding to a basket. It's not quite as fulfilling as walking around a store and getting inspired by seeing a different spice in a spice rack as I'm walking through that particular part of the supermarket, for instance. So that's why I'm thinking this idea that a virtual showroom, a demonstration area, I can stop for a while and watch somebody cooking something, or I think there's a number of things that we will need to consider going forward. And I actually like that phrase that you used, the fluidity of retail, the fluidity of shopping is a lovely thought. I think that we should all be looking to both practically and emotionally embrace.
Well, you can use that, Tim. I'll gift it to you.
Hey,
On a serious note, when you now sit down with a client, physically or virtually, and discuss a new format, do you now bring with you and your team a different approach to that now, given what we've all been living through over the course of the last few months?
yes, inevitably. But let me be quite honest. We're all still, we've got a lot of muscle memory built up over a lot of years about it's almost a similar analogy to the whole concept of sustainability. The whole design industry, the whole creative industry is getting more used to now. Our muscle memory, the chords we can play on our guitar has changed dramatically over the last few years in terms of the specification of products, really thinking about specification of materials, really thinking hard about how you create a space that is more sustainable, is more beneficial to the planet. I think we are only at the beginning at the moment of thinking now about the implications of space and how you use space so that it's safer. So I don't think we have all the answers yet, but yeah, I mean, it is becoming almost the additional, if not the first thing we're now having to think about when you plan out a space. In fact, I've been on 2 or 3 calls even just in this last week where we've significantly rethought the layout of an environment because of, as you can, I mean, it sounds obvious to say now, but because of the concerns of consumers about being too close together and all those other aspects as well.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's amazing to think of, but I don't suppose in December 2019 there was anything called social distancing that went into any design briefs for any retail stores.
No, I mean, remarkably, and I say this with a hint of not sadness, but a hint of concern is that, in fact, if anything, one of the things we were doing in terms of planning spaces was actually looking for the spaces, the sociable spaces, the community spaces. because again, retail was morphing more physically into places where people could hang out and be together. That development has somewhat been arrested now, because we've got to be mindful that that's maybe not going to be possible, or certainly for the next few months, foreseeable future. But that was certainly a direction of travel that retail was taking, where a community space, a social space was becoming part of the block that you would plan into in and around the product layout, the service layout, and all those aspects.
Well, indeed. I mean, a number of retailers' sort of regeneration strategy, physical regeneration strategy, was sort of built on those pillars, of creating spaces within the stores for like-minded people to congregate. I think Office Depot's probably a good example of that.
Yeah, we ran a great student scheme with Retail Expo this year. I was working with Farnham and a couple of other colleges for Pets at Home, which was all about how you can create a place where you can take your pet,
Yeah.
and you can hang out with other pet owners, and you can compare notes on what it's like to have a dog or a cat or whatever. And it was all about hanging out together, in a what we call a campfire experience. People sitting around the campfire, as it were, metaphorically, just talking about things that they're interested in. I still think that's going to be possible. I mean, again, I'm not a medical person. I don't really know where all this is going to land. But I still think that is human instinct. People want to be together, whether
Yes.
it's
Well,
in the back garden or.
we're sociable animals. I mean, I think that's probably one of the key things we've all learned right across the world over the last few months, that the sociability of meeting people, the serendipity nature of bumping into people, having interesting conversations, swapping ideas, is something that's greatly missed. I mean, we're
Well, I
almost.
mean, that's one of the questions that we, as you go, and I'm sure you've been asked many times, is there a future for physical retail? And the answer is, and I am determined about this, that absolutely. And that's not because I'm trying to save my job, because that's not what it's about. People like being around other people. People enjoy shopping. Will physical retail be different? Absolutely. Will it still be around? Absolutely.
Well, Tim, we're almost out of time, and that's actually quite an appropriate way of ending on an optimistic note. Something that Rodney would definitely approve of. Tim Greenhalgh, the creative director and chairman of Fitch. It's always a pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
It's really good to see you, David. You take care.